Someone said to me last week, we got 3 more years of this. And I was confused to what they were talking about. But then it hit me and I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot the election was like last year. Am I the only person who feels like this time distortion where it's like, it feels like the current political administration in America right now is moving at such a pace where it feels like we've had the same president for a long time. This year felt like a long time. So I was asking or basically telling someone else about the same thing. I was like, bro, like, am I going crazy? It feels like the election was years ago. And he was like, I feel that too. I wonder why. And then I thought to myself, actually, it's probably because so much stuff has happened since January 2025. And I'm not going to lie, other presidents that we've had felt a bit dormant. I'm not saying they weren't doing anything, but they weren't like going rapid fire with the moves they were making. We've seen so many things change. The tariffs, the cultural and social policies, and how people are reacting, usually in outrage or support, obviously. Like everyone's involved. Well, I wouldn't say everyone, but like a lot of people are like more tuned in or involved now. In my lifetime, I've never seen things move this fast. When I was in high school, I had to take a quiz on James Madison, who was the fourth United States president. And he wrote an essay called Federalist No. 51. And within it, he wrote, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. And kind of flew over my head, and I was just thinking about it. Like the way I interpret this, though, is that he's saying that the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and the core ideology of the founding fathers, who were influenced by the Enlightenment period, by the way, assumed that all human beings are driven by self-interest, which is true. And because of this, every human being is vulnerable and subject to corruption, which is true. And because of that, they need to create a system where a man's ambitions need to be separated. This is where the whole separation of powers and checks and balances system comes into America. It's why we have a legislative, executive, and judicial branch. This is so each branch has the ability to limit the powers of other branches. For example, the president can veto and overrule a law, right? But Congress can override that veto or overruling. Like it keeps people in check. The founding fathers didn't want a single person or a group to dominate. And I think this is what a lot of people have misunderstood about this system or the intentions of the founding fathers. It was not designed to elect like a president or a perfect leader or leaders of this country. It was not designed for that. It was designed because we can't trust human beings. And historically speaking, there is an issue with people who get power because they get selfish, they get corrupt. And, people are imperfect in general. And that's why we need to keep everyone in line. But in today's political climate, we have factions or political parties or, special interest groups that influence the system. And some of you may say that these special interest groups, like those fighting for the rights of certain people or whatever, are, they're the reason why this country is really divided. But, going back to what James Madison was like writing about, he also wrote that, look, if you destroy factions or special interest groups, you destroy the very liberty of America, which I personally agree with. I feel like groups can exist, but like everyone else, like every other group, should be subject to debate. Even if the group's existence, the special interest group, or whatever the liberty they're fighting for or rights they're fighting for, even if you personally believe, whoever's watching, you believe it's idiotic and you don't agree with it, but you should have the right to feel a certain way, but you should be very open to debate. This is part of the rights you have as an American rather. The problem with today is that I think the founding fathers' intentions have not been kept stable because it was supposed to be a branch versus branch type system. Now it's more or less a party versus party conflict. When we have like the president and Congress, for example, in the same party, or at least majority wise in terms of like who's controlling certain things, Congress isn't going to do a good job as well, because they'll act more like a shield for the president rather than not, of course. Like today, people are more interested in protecting their party, not the power that they have in that branch. You know what I mean? If you're a senator, you should be protecting and following based on what powers you have in the Senate, obviously. You know what I'm saying? You're a senator, okay? But a lot of people are more focused on how they could protect their party instead. In the end, maybe that feeling of time distortion that I was talking about earlier in this video, where the last year feels like a decade, is exactly what happens when a fast-moving executive branch collides with, I would say, a certain legislative branch. I feels like the legislative branch is a little bit, I don't know, paralyzed now. The founders designed a system to handle human imperfection, and they use the word ambition a lot, right? They want to protect that. I mean, they not protect that. They want to handle that. But they assume that ambition would drive a senator, for example, to defend the Senate, not just defend the president of their own party and so forth. Again, that was just one example. We are currently witnessing a 250-year-old system being stress tested by the speed of modern times, and almost, I would say like tribal loyalty. Maybe it's like tribal loyalty. If we want to survive the next 3 years, as people are saying, I'm not saying like, I'm not picking a side here on how you feel about like the current situation, the current president or whatever. I'm just saying, if the people who feel like they aren't going to survive, or it's been like a long time or something like that, or whatever, right? If we're going to survive the next how many years, doesn't matter who becomes president, we have to hope about what James Madison said about ambition counteracting ambition. We need to hope that starts working the way it was intended, because again, someone's self-interest needs to be checked. If you're the president, you need to constantly be checked by the other branches, regardless of which party is in charge. Your own party should tell you, hey, listen, hey, that ain't right. Too much corruption is going to go with that. You can't do that. You can't this and that and yada, yada, yada. But times have changed, and such is life. I don't like talking about politics in videos. You know how I am, but maybe today was a little bit different, a fresh year, right? Do you feel like this year has been way longer than usual because of this? How do you feel about the current political climate as well? Let me know down below. This episode is found on Spotify and YouTube.